I don't know how long it had been since I'd moved into this room in a bedroom community before I noticed that the 3 windows in the house across the street were constantly on fire. I must have noticed it sometime during my 3rd month, during my study night vigils. In the middle of the night, I'd go to the window to relieve my eyes of monitor fatigue. And sure enough, my gaze was fixed on those damn windows. 3 windows in a row, with the light always on, no matter how deep the night was. I still don't know what the building was. It was quite low, 4 stories, and slightly resembled a school building. I walked around it one afternoon and didn't see any identifying signs, and the heavy metal doors, covered with a layer of rust, looked as if they had not been touched for a long time. Of course, they were locked. Other than those 3 windows on the 4th floor, nothing in the building showed any signs of life. I tried to look through the windows on the 1st floor, but I couldn't see anything. The panes were cloudy, and there seemed to be curtains behind them. One thing I can say for sure, the closer I got to them, the more uncomfortable I became. In the 4th month, I saw a silhouette. I stood at the window in the night and looked out at the empty night street. There was absolute silence. Gradually, my gaze spontaneously focused on the windows. For a moment, something in the room distracted my attention, and when I looked at the windows again, I saw a silhouette. He was standing in the left window, absolutely motionless, and could be seen extremely clearly. He and the window were clearly not separated even by a curtain. But most importantly, even though my windows were higher up, I lived on the 6th floor, and the lights were off. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that he was seeing me, looking at me, right into my eyes. I saw him all the time now. Every night. It was like he was attracted to me. I could stand in a dark room for half an hour in the middle of the night and just stare at him. Maybe it was that interest that almost got me killed. One day I stood like that and stared. Without taking my eyes off the dark silhouette, I raised my hand and touched the glass. What happened in the next instant made me shudder with horror, because he did the same thing. Without a second's hesitation, I drew the curtains and collapsed onto the bed, covering myself like a cowardly child. The darkness and complete silence pressed down on me, and I couldn't stand it any longer, so I got up and turned on the light. All that night, I didn't sleep, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare. The next day I thought about it, convincing myself that nothing terrible had happened. What after all, even if he did see me? It was impossible to see me in the dark room, of course, but the outline of a hand leaning against the glass, he might well have seen me, couldn't he? I convinced myself, eager to change my mind. I made a big mistake that night. I went to the window again. He was standing there. Of course. I looked at him, gingerly touched the glass again. He was motionless. Having experienced some relief, I turned away from the window, and what I saw the next moment made me swoon with horror. At first glance, I saw nothing unusual. The wall was just a reflection of the window and my outline in it. But the thing was that my silhouette in the window absolutely repeated its silhouette. I instantly recognized those outlines because I had looked at him so much that they were forever etched in my memory. My heart raced. It felt like it was going to tear my chest open. I turned to the window again and stared at the silhouette in horror. He raised his hand slowly and pulled it slowly, infinitely slowly, it seemed to me, to the edge of the window. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the wall and turned around, though I didn't turn around to realize what was happening. The dark reflection on the wall, my damn reflection, was pulling my arm just as slowly, making an absolutely identical movement. That was the final straw. I woke up in the morning on the floor, under the window. I vaguely remembered the vision that had come to me while I'd been unconscious, as if that silhouette were standing right outside my window, with only a thin line of glass separating us. Though, remembering the events of that night, I couldn't be sure it was only a vision. I didn't wait for the next night. I didn't have much stuff, and a day was enough to move in with an acquaintance who lived on the other side of town. I put the apartment up for sale, not even caring much about the price. I just wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. Not surprisingly, I found a buyer relatively quickly. It's been 2 years. I've only been down that street a handful of times in that time. I consciously avoided it, but even when necessity brought me there, I could not even think of looking at that building, at those windows. One day I was walking down the street, immersed in my thoughts. It was fall. The asphalt was wet with rain. An elderly man was walking towards me, in whom I recognized my former neighbor from that very apartment at once, despite the years that had passed and the fact that he had almost completely bald during that time. I pretended not to notice him, for I didn't want any reminders of the time when everything had happened. And I wasn't surprised that the chatty old man recognized me and called out to me. We talked for about 5 minutes, but what I learned from him was enough for several sleepless nights. A young man in his 30s, to whom I had sold an apartment at the time, was found dead. No external injuries, just a broken heart. The body was discovered in the morning, and I still shudder at 2 intrusive thoughts. I'm responsible for his death. It could have been me, or could I still be? I'm afraid. I don't know who you are or what your name is, but listen to me. If you ever hear someone in your backyard breaking down your driveway, whether it's yours or a neighbor's, and yelling in a rough male voice, open the door for me. Know that you have to pack your bags and run. Run to the other side of town, or maybe to another city, even another country, and pray. Pray to whomever you want. Christ, Buddha, Kulu, that it doesn't get you. Better yet, get yourself an animal. A kitty, a dog, a fish, or even a Brazilian tarantula. The main thing is to have some animal in your house. It will be able to warn you of its approach. I myself had an aquarium with a goldfish and a collie named Jackson, but I failed to realize in time what their strange deaths meant. At first, Jackson began to behave strangely. He could not sit still, all the time asked for a walk, and on the street wanted to break free and run away. The fish died as soon as the dog started to go crazy. I didn't see anything sinister in it. Well, the fish died and died. We'll send its corpse to learn the secrets of the city sewer, and that's the end of it. And the dog is probably just in a playful mood, which will pass in a couple of days. But neither in a couple of days nor in a week did Jackson calm down, but only became more noisy. He was constantly whining, especially at night, wanting to run away from the apartment, and generally as far away from our yard as possible. On walks, I began to notice that the same thing was happening to some of my neighbors' dogs. And there was another oddity. Despite the summertime, the birds had disappeared from the yard. There were no sparrows chirping, no crows cawing, and none of that idiotic sound that pigeons make. The end of all this animal madness was one interesting procession that took place in my yard. I opened the door to the entryway, and thank goodness I didn't go in right away, because a whole line of rats came running out. There must have been about 100 of them, hundreds of dark brown furry bodies, with nasty bald tails, making nasty squeaking noises. Jackson went crazy for about a week, after which his behavior took a 180-degree turn. Inattentiveness was replaced by apathy, and my doggie spent all day and night on his bed. He had almost stopped eating, and I had already decided to take him to the vet the following weekend, but when I returned home one day after a day of work, I found him dead. The unfortunate Jackson had been living with me for 5 years now, and I was terribly saddened by his passing. I realized it was due to some kind of illness. That's why he was acting so strangely. And I felt guilty about it. All the animals that could left our yard, and those that couldn't chose to die. It might have seemed as if some evil was coming upon us all, and the animal sensed it. But man is the dumbest animal, and none of the people in our yard felt the approaching storm, and it was ready to break. It started on a warm Friday in June. It was about 12 o'clock, and I had just gone to bed before I could fall asleep, when suddenly a wild rumble and a shout came from the street. "Open the door for me." Apparently it was not opened, and the knocking was repeated again. Then came another shout. "I'll open the door for you," followed by a long, coarse mat. Two rude men had quarreled. So what of it? So I thought, falling asleep and hoping that the shouts of their fight would not disturb my sleep. In the morning, going to the store to buy bread, I saw an ambulance standing in the yard. Thinking that someone was ill, I went on my way. Later, however, I learned that no one was sick, just a dead body found in the driveway. The deceased was John Woodson, a man in his 40s who lived next door. As it turned out, he was the one who was going to open the door the previous night, which is why he left the house. His wife had gone to the cottage as early as Thursday, so there was no one to be concerned that he was taking so long to return. There were no signs of a fight, and John Woodson died of a heart attack. No witnesses were found. Our yard is quite large, and with the lack of proper benches and an undisturbed playground, few people gather in our yard on Friday nights to drink beer. 2 days later at night, I woke up to a rumbling noise and the same cry. "Open the door for me." Yeah, someone forgot their keys again. How mystical is that? I soothed myself, trying to sleep. In the wee hours of the morning, I woke up from my thirst and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Thanks to the open windows and living on the first floor, I could hear almost everything that was going on outside at that time. The noise caught my attention, and opening the curtains a little, I looked outside. There I saw that a police car was parked at the neighbor's entrance, and the officers of the law were interviewing people in bathrobes and house slippers. I quickly realized that it was the residents of the first floor who had run outside from their apartments for some reason. Talking to a neighbor about it the next day, I learned that there had been a break-in on the first floor in the next doorway. During the night, the neighbors were awakened by a terrible rumbling noise, and the whole crowd poured out onto the landing. The door to one of the apartments was broken open. The jamb had long been in need of repair and the door in need of replacement, so this was no great obstacle to the robbers. One brave man decided to go inside, but in terror he ran out of there with a wild scream, and after him all the neighbors ran out of the entrance. Until the police arrived, people were afraid to go into the entrance, and the poor man who dared to go into that apartment sat silently aside. Even the police couldn't get him to talk. They found nothing in that apartment. No blood, no corpses, no owners. They had disappeared somewhere, although all the neighbors claimed that the young family that lived in that apartment had not gone anywhere. Mystical, I thought, and did not take this story with due seriousness, although somewhere inside me there was already a worry. 3 days after that, I was again awakened in the night, this time by a call on the intercom, cursing the light. I went to the receiver. "Yes," I said in a sleepy voice. "I'm sorry to wake you up," began a low male voice. But I lost the key to the intercom, please. I didn't finish listening to him and hung up. I wondered what kind of junkie wanted to get into our entrance to get high or rob someone. But the call immediately repeated, and I had to mute the sound to get a good night's sleep. Just as I was getting back into bed, I suddenly heard a shriek from the street. "Open the door for me." Now this creepy visitor was breaking into my entryway. I immediately compared the facts and realized how this night might end for me if I let him in. And the first wave of fear rolled down my spine in goosebumps. I tried to reassure myself that my front door was too strong to break down, so even if this madman did let someone in, there was nothing he could do to me. The scream was repeated over and over again, accompanied by a loud banging on the entryway door. I didn't understand at first why no one had come out to chase the man away, but then I remembered John Woodson had ventured out and realized that people were holding on to the memory of the incident. For about 10 minutes I lay on my bed with my head covered, wishing this maniac would go away. Suddenly I had the strange and frightening thought that it was not a man who was breaking into the entryway otherwise. How could I explain the strange death of John Woodson and the disappearance of that family? Nor would one man have the strength to break down a door, however flimsy. Suddenly, the thing that was so eager to get in the doorway knocked on my window and spoke to me. It was unimaginably scary, as if some super intelligent monster had quietly entered your apartment. "Hey you," I heard a man's bass. "I know you're lying there, wrapped in a blanket, hoping I won't get you. Ah, you're wrong. I'll come tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and so on until I get to the entrance. If I don't get in that way, I'll find another way. So let me in. Don't make life difficult for both of us." I tried to cover my ears so I wouldn't hear that voice. There was something unspeakably awful about the fact that he was talking to me. I never slept again that night. For a while the thing was still banging on the doorway, but then it left. In the morning I immediately packed my things and moved in with my parents. I spent 3 quiet nights at their place, and then I heard that monstrous scream again. In the last month I had changed several places of residence. I stayed with friends and relatives, and never stayed anywhere for more than a week. No one could understand this running around in apartments. They told me that it was no big deal if some drunk was pounding on the door demanding to be let in. But I knew what it was all about. Recently, my stalker changed his methodology. He was no longer banging on the door at night, but was more subtle. I started receiving letters, both by regular mail and by email, inviting me to all sorts of events. Yes, of course. Would anyone in their right mind invite me to the opening of a book salon on the site of an abandoned factory or to a car show in a country forest? I quickly realized that Mohammed had decided to wait for the mountain to come to him. Well, so be it. Maybe soon he'll change tactics again, and then I'll have no choice but to go straight into his clutches. I don't know what it is or why it wants me. I think there's some sort of harvesting going on. Apparently, this creature needs certain people that it will stop at nothing to get. Now that you've read my story, I hope you'll know what to do when all the critters disappear from your yard, and you hear a scream in the night to open the door.